If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Late night hikers, what is the creepiest thing you have seen while hiking? I was walking around my neighborhood alone once, enjoying the night air and watching the stars. There was this little pond near my house, with a wooded area that had trees, a bench and a rope swing that went out over the water. I sat down on the bench to look at the stars and I heard some rustling off to my right, towards the trees. Bears were not uncommon where I'm from, so I took out my flashlight and shone it around over there. I didn't see anything. It freaked me out, so I kept my flashlight on and my senses aware, but I stayed on the bench to mull over my thoughts and watch the sky some more. I don't know why I did that, cause that's typical horror movie shit. Anyway, a few minutes pass and I hear nothing more, so I lean back into the bench and start to relax a bit. I'm staring up at the sky with my flashlight pointed downwards, so as not to create any light pollution, when I notice something in the tree in my peripheral vision. I couldn't tell what it was, but the branch was swaying slightly, and the rustling noise was back too. I immediately sat up and stared at it, but hadn't shown my flashlight at it yet in case of pissing off some huge bird or something else. I don't think I've ever been that scared. I remember my heart was beating so fast and I could taste blood. I stared at it for what seemed like forever, and it slowly stopped moving. But the shape was still there. Bears do climb trees sometimes, so I was hesitant to run away in case that's what it was. So I just kept staring at it. After a while I mustered up the little raisin-esque cojones to shine my goddamned light at the tree. It was a man. A ducking man. In the tree. Crouched in the tree like some silent, naked monkey. He had no expression on his face, but his eyes were open really, really wide. When my light landed on him he started to move like he was going to come down, but I didn't stick around to see if he did. I jumped the bench and ran for the ducking hills. I ran to my house and around to the back door and locked myself in without looking back once. I went around and made sure every window and door was locked. I even checked the attic. I never go out alone anymore. Usually, it's what I hear. Large, fallen, branches snapping just out of sight of my headlamp. Or waking up an hour later and hearing steps and leaves rustling, but too exhausted and fearful to inspect or want to know, probably nothing important anyway. One time I returned to my car after a late night hike with friends and my SUV was covered in foot/hand/paw prints. They were just so large and even dragged a little in the dust. It was on/near a large military base in the mountains. I think some local enlisted may have made them to scare us. But it was just so well done. Pretty scary for all of us because it's what you'd imagine the Blair Witch would do. No animal did it. A few friends and I went on an overnight hike in the Rockies behind our little town a few years back when I was in HS. Our camping site was pretty far up there and it was getting dark. The spot we were at was nestled in a grove of trees secluded from the wind and elements, so we decided to stop there for the night. The four of us built a little fire and ate dinner, then just talked for a few hours. Then all of a sudden my friend leaps forward and douses the fire with our emergency water, plunging us into complete darkness. Needless to say, the rest of us were pretty pissed as there was no reason for him to do this. He quickly shushes us and we realize he is absolutely terrified. Like so scared he couldn't even speak or move. The rest of us managed to get a few words out of him and he tells us to look up on the ridge where we should have been camping at. It was pretty far up, so it was kind of hard to see at first, but that sight will haunt me for the rest of my life. There was a fire, a big one, like a bonfire sort of thing. Around the fire were several figures moving in a slow circle. They were humanoid but not quite, and they had arms and legs like people, but something just seemed different about them that I can't really explain. Almost like the limbs were too long and skinny or something, but maybe not. Anyway, these figures just moved around the fire in a really slow circle over and over again. My one friend claims he could hear them singing something, but I don't remember anything. Importantly, there was one standing off to the side a little ways, leaning with his arm on a tree branch above his head. It really creeped us out, but we were able to sleep it off. We figured it was a scout troop having a camp or something. Morning came and we finished off our hike to the peak, and on our way down we passed the place we saw the figures and decided to check out the camp. It was completely deserted. It was obvious that there had been a fire and there were footprints everywhere. Inside the fire pit was a small mound of charred animal bones, probably chipmunk, and a pile of 4 or 5 rodent skulls that had been burned. Creepy, right? Then we look over at where the one figure was standing. Blood. Not a lot, but enough to be of concern or anything but enough to be creepy. Then we see the tree branch he was casually leaning against. It was well over any of our heads and I'm over 6 foot. That would mean that in order for the figure to lean against it like he would need to be at least 7 feet tall. Needless to say, we got off that mountain very fast and I have never been up there again. We called the Fish and Wildlife Rangers and told them what we saw. They said it was probably just a bunch of kids messing around and not to worry about it. It might have been just that, and we let our imaginations run wild, but all four of us swear to this day we all saw the same thing and it didn't look like a bunch of kids in the dark. I don't believe in ghost or the supernatural, but those mountains still scare the shit out of me and I will never go back there again. I walk at night in my rural area regularly. I've encountered black bears, coyotes, bobcats, angry deer, and everything on down, with no real concern. But the creepiest encounter was a little black pickup truck with rainbow and unicorn stickers. Bubblegum pop music blaring, and it smelled like cotton candy when it passed me. First time it passed me it swerved to hit me. I jumped out of the way easily. I thought nothing of it really, just figured they were startled by seeing me at night with my reflective gear. The truck circled back and comes at me again. I saw it coming this time and grabbed my dog up just in time to jump into a ditch. I heard little girl laughter, high-pitched and maniacal. The tiny truck circled back for a third go at me, but by then I was hiding in my neighbor's shrubbery. I watched it slowly drive down the road, hearing giggling as it passed me. Fortunately it kept on going and I made it home just fine. I was camping and some of the group had gone off on a late night stroll. After a while, me and a friend got bored and decided to go look for them. It was pretty much rolling grassland hills with few trees out there, so we figured it wouldn't be hard. It was also unearthly quiet, other than the occasional distant owl or coyote sounds, so we were whispering and being very chill. There was pretty good moon so we hadn't brought lights either. Anyway, I finally see someone standing under a tree on the crest of this hill, so I go up there first. I call out quietly and don't get a response. Again, no response. Kinda annoyed, I just strut up there, but I'm realizing something looks weird about this person I've been seeing. They're holding their arms over their head and the proportions aren't right. But I think that was all kinda subconscious, because I didn't do anything different until I got close enough to see that it wasn't a person at all, but a ducking coyote that someone had flayed and strung up to the tree by the limbs like some kind of totem. I literally fell backwards in shock. Turns out the woman who owned the property was no fan of coyotes coming after her livestock. She also woke us all up in the middle of the night once with sustained AR-15 fire. Like 20 shots. Someone who lived near there just said, "Oh, she must have found a whole pack of them. Go back to sleep." When I was younger and stupider and going to college in the North Georgia mountains, my friends and I would go night hiking a lot on the trails near campus. I got pretty familiar with the area, and being out in the wilderness at night in general, which probably made me too confident. One night the full moon was out, and the weather was perfect, so visibility was crazy good. Everything was basically washed in dim blue light. I was slightly stoned, and feeling adventurous, and I love doing fun stuff alone, so I decided to go enjoy a night hike by myself. I took a flashlight, but this was around 2002 so no cell phone. I chose a super easy trail that was mostly flat / maybe a mile loop, in pretty secluded area, but not exactly a national park or anything, very rural area. I didn't even need my flashlight for most of it, and just hiked in the moonlight. It was actually a really cool / beautiful experience at first. At some point I started feeling uneasy, and maybe a millisecond later I heard a man's voice. It was coming from a good distance ahead of me, somewhere off in the woods, maybe from the right side of the trail. He was crying. I'm honestly an empathetic person, and 99.9% of the time I hear someone crying I want to comfort / help them in some way, but this time I felt sick in the stomach, like a dry panic attack, if that makes sense. I remember coming very close to calling out to him, because my brain was trying to tell me he might be hurt, which was the only reason I hesitated, but it was like my body shut my voice down before I could say anything, and I knew I had to stay very quiet. He was sobbing like he'd just found out a loved one had died, but also gibbering, and almost babbling, like he was less than a person. There was a shrillness to it, under his crying, like he was holding back a scream, but perpetually, on and on, as if he'd been doing it all night. I remember it vividly, and my spine is tingling like crazy even as I write this. It's hard to explain, but I knew deep down he wasn't right in the head, and nothing good would happen if he realized I was listening. I went back the way I came. It was like I had tunnel hearing, and the only sound in the world was that crying. I was hyper aware of everything else around me, and beyond paranoid that I would snap a branch, or snag my boot on something. I worried the man's crying would get louder if I wasn't paying razor sharp attention, getting closer, or turn into an outraged crazy person scream. Thankfully it just faded the further I got from it, and I made it back to my car. Still, I was convinced some wild-eyed hermit was going to rush out of the forest and bite me to death, right up to the second I locked my doors and got the duck out of there. I finally had the rest of my panic attack on the drive back. I managed to park back at campus, and I just sat in the car and collected myself. Adrenaline is ducking powerful. I have never felt a shred of guilt about leaving the guy crying out in the woods in the dark. I know I was slightly stoned, but slightly is the key word there. I'm convinced to this day I was in very real danger that night. But sometimes I get that same sick feeling deep down, whenever I wonder what might have happened if the moon been less bright, or if I'd been more responsible, and I decided to use my flashlight even once. He'd have seen me for sure. My girlfriend and I had driven down an old dirt road that ran beside a lake on one side with mountains on the other. We were looking for unexplored territory to hike in. The dirt road became a trail and eventually was swallowed up entirely by the forest. Once the path became impassable by car, we got out and hiked for quite some time and began making our way back to the car as the sun was going down. It was a challenge getting the car turned around, but I finally managed and we were off. It was slow going as it was a shitty road and getting dark fast. Suddenly we came to fork in the path that hadn't been visible coming the other way. Neither of us had any idea whether to go right or left, so I just picked randomly, hoping that both would end up taking us back to the main road. As we rounded a small curve in the road, our headlights fall upon a man dragging a large hockey duffel bag off the trail into the woods. As soon as the lights hit him, he just froze completely still. Driving past him felt like an eternity because we couldn't have been doing more than 5 miles an hour, due to the shitty road. My girlfriend and I didn't say a word to each other until we were well past him, at which point we were like, WTF was that? And then the road ended. Just like where we had stopped the first time, the forest had swallowed up this part of the road. We were going to have to turn around and drive by the man with the human-sized duffel bag again. I told my girlfriend to buckle up and hold on tight because at the first sign of trouble I was going to gun it. We came to the spot where the man was and he was nowhere to be seen. We eventually made it to the right path and got the duck out of there. The weirdest thing about it was that there wasn't a vehicle anywhere near this guy for 50 miles in either direction. We would have seen it if there had been. We'd traveled as far as possible both ways and there just wasn't a place to pull off of the road. How the hell did he get there? Where was he going? What was in the bag? I am an outdoorsman. I'm very experienced in hunting, camping, hiking, and general survival. I'm very familiar and used to wildlife, and I was charged by what I believe was a cryptid called a dogman. It charged me and my cousin. It was not a bear cannot move how it did, and it was not a normal wolf as they can't comfortably run on 2 legs, whereas what charged us seemed natural at doing. I can elaborate further if you wish. This happened around June or July of 2007, I believe. I was around 17 years old and more cocky then, but still somewhat knowledgeable of the outdoors. My family used to own a cabin in NW, Wisconsin. I basically grew up there in the summer. I knew the woods well, but at night it was wise to stay in the cabin or at least by the bonfire by the beach, because of bears, wolves, and cougars. One of the creepiest things was if you were having a bonfire, the tree line was visible from the fire pit and beach, and at night you always felt like you were being watched from that tree line. But during the day the woods always seemed normal, not so creepy, that is until this incident. So this happened somewhere between 1200 to 1400. Me and my cousin were having an airsoft battle. I was in full woodland camo, he was not. I retreated onto the ATV trail into the woods for a tactical advantage and our battle took us about 200 meters into about a third of the way up the trail. We had enough at this point and were standing at the edge of a clearing on the trail talking, and he was maybe 10 feet from me. When I decided to mess with him, I shushed him and said, "We're being watched." He froze. Then I realized the woods were dead quiet and I got spooked and started scanning the tree line and the other edge of the clearing from left to right when I saw it. Its teeth gave it away. It was panting and staring at my cousin. I don't expect you to believe me, but what I saw was a wolf as big as a black bear, at least 300 pounds, but it wasn't normal. This wolf was on 2 legs crouching next to a tree with its arm grasping the tree, grasping with a clawed hand. It had reddish-brown fur. I told my cousin that we have to go, and next thing I know he is sprinting and I look back at Wolfie, who had locked on and sprinted a few steps on 2 feet, and then I turned and ran when it looked like Wolfie was dropping to all fours. It charged us and sounded right on our asses barreling through the brush, but for whatever reason let us go when we broke out of the tree line and headed for the cabin. What stuck with me the most was the sheer size. Wolfie appeared to be nearly 7 tall when upright, and that where it should have had front paws it appeared to have large clawed hands. Now I'm not sure how to explain it away rationally. I have heard wolves will occasionally kind of walk upright, but as far as I know they can't sprint on 2 legs, nor do wolves get that big, and black bears more waddle on 2 legs. The closest description is silly, a werewolf or dogman. I have a large farm in Gippsland, Australia. Most nights I would walk the fences with the dogs just to relax. This walk would usually take an hour and a bit. This one year in winter we had a very large collection of dead trees in the back paddock that we had decided to burn. Started the fire in the morning and let it burn all day. Every so often I'd go and check that it was okay. So it get to night and around 9 p.m. I decide to go for my walk and check on the fire, go to get the dogs, and they just stayed in their kennels. Which was strange, but they had a big day herding. As I get down towards the fire, I just get this chill through my body and start to feel unsettled. At this point I just beeline to the fire. As I'm about 5 meters from the fire, I see a figure to my left but behind me by about 50 feet. At this point I think it's one of the dogs that has finally followed me. I turn to call it over and I get no response. I whistle some commands and still no response. It's just standing there. I'm shitting bricks at this point and move closer to the fire and grab a burning branch. I start to think I'm ducked. It's a wild dog, my wife will find me mauled. I decide to rush it and hopefully scare it off. I take 2 steps and this thing takes off like a bullet. The only noise is when it jumps the fence and hit the bush. I run back to the house, to find the dogs all where I left them. The next day I go to check the fire with the dogs. Both of them refused to get out of the ute and even the cows wouldn't go near the area. I stopped walking after that and now I carry a knife with me when I go in that area of the farm. For a few years in my early 20s, I was living on the East Coast. My area ran right along the Blue Ridge Mountains, and I'd often go on short day hikes with a few friends along the marked paths in the afternoons when we were all free. A few times I'd gone alone, but I always kept to the same few areas and knew my way around well. On this particular day I'd waited a little later into the afternoon for my friends so we could go up the trails, but they ended up busy and I, feeling fat after a whole pizza for lunch with soda, decided to get in the car and go hike it off by myself to ease my guilty conscience. There's some particular trails I like to use. They shoot you straight up an incline to get your cardio in quick and hard, and then an adjoining, smaller path winds you back down around the other side of the face. About a third of the way down, there's trees to the right and a steepish hill on the left that drops down to a low spot where I could usually spot deer herds and fun stuff. I struggled going up that day, and I'd waited later than usual, so it was probably close to 7 o'clock to 7:10 p.m. by the time I reached the fork and turned back downhill. Mid-fall, this meant it was fairly dark by that time. As I'm walking, I notice a person in the valley. She had on a long, pinky white dress, and by the way she was changing positions and shuffling around, it looked like she was in the middle of a photo shoot. I couldn't see the photographer, and it was a little late for photos, but I figured the camera person was probably in the tree line and that they were likely finishing up after golden hour. I stopped to watch for a second, thinking how great a spot it was for some really awesome pictures. All of a sudden it was as if she fell. She didn't lower herself, there was no crouching or sitting motion, it was more like watching a glitch in real life. She was standing, and then she was face down on the ground with her legs bent up under her body. I got this really awful feeling all of a sudden, like shivers down my neck. Without taking my eyes off her, she started crawling on all fours right up the hill towards the trail I was on. She wasn't on her knees though, she was basically running on her hands and feet. Maybe I was just freaked out, but she was closing in far faster than it seemed like she should have been. It was almost like she'd been sped up, but the rest of the world was still moving by just the same. I wish I could say I'd pulled my phone out and gotten video evidence, or at least taken a picture, or been brave and kicked some spooky ass, but I was suddenly overcome with an intense feeling of danger and I fell/ran the rest of the way back to the parking lot without looking back even once. I peeled out of there and haven't gone back since. The weirdest part is that my car had been the only one in the lot when I got back to it, and that area isn't super accessible by any other park and hike type trailheads that I know of. I wrote it off as crazy drugs and nothing more, but I don't know. I told my friends, and a few of them went out later that night to investigate. Super duper smart idea, I know, but nobody has even seen anything like that out there since. Years ago, before we got married, my wife and I went to a local state park, with a picnic and a hammock. We set the hammock up in the woods, enjoyed our picnic, then fell asleep together in the hammock. I was abruptly awakened by my wife. She motioned for me to be quiet. The sun had set, there was still a hint of light in the sky, but we couldn't see anything meaningful in the woods. My wife beckoned me to listen. Complete silence. Then, the snap of a branch, in the distance. More silence. We were both suddenly very on edge. We whispered to one another, trying to figure out if someone was sneaking up on us. The silence was broken again, another branch, same direction but closer. Then, from another direction a momentary crunch of leaves. Now, we were terrified. We both had pocket knives on us, small but better than nothing. We also had a flashlight. We drew our knives and deliberated whether whatever was out there knew our location. We decided to keep the light off, lest we give away our exact location. Maybe we could run for the car? More steps, in rapid succession, coming directly toward us, then silence again. My wife had enough. We know you duckers are out there, she yelled. silence for an eternity, and then another crunch of leaves. We had enough. We prepared ourselves as best we could for a fight, then shined the flashlight into the darkness, toward the last noise we had heard. 3 deer scampered away, into the darkness. We sheepishly gathered our things and left without incident. Years ago, when I was in my late teens, me, my cousin and 4 friends went camping about 90 minutes north of where we lived in the Bay Area of CA. We went to a regular camping ground and set up for 3 days and nights of partying. We heard from a few campers who were somewhat locals of the area, living within 20 to 30 minutes drive, that there were local stories about a section of the woods that were supposed to be off limits due to paranormal activity. As soon as I heard that, I decided we had to go check it out. My cousin and one of our friends were willing to go. Our other 3 friends thought it was bull and stayed to get more drunk/stoned, so we set off on the second night. We got directions from a boyfriend/girlfriend on where to drive to, so we went at about 11 p.m. We arrived at 11:20 due to dirt roads and going slow to not pop a tire. After parking, we got out on foot and walked for about the same amount of time, maybe a little longer, into the woods, single file down what seemed like a game trail. After about 30 minutes of walking, we started to see a glow in the near distance. We kept walking, but more quietly. When we got to within about 300 yards, we could see that it was a bonfire with several small fires around it. When we got to within 250 yards, we could hear people. We started to get a bit spooked at this point, but like naive kids kept going. As soon as we got to within about 70 to 80 yards, we could pretty much make out that we stumbled onto a ritual being held in the middle of the woods. We couldn't make out what the people were wearing or specifically doing, but they were visible in the firelight, and there were about 12 to 15 of them around the main fire, chanting and occasionally yelling. The main person, I assume, would walk to the edge of the circle of flames, disappear for a few seconds due to not being visible, then come back to the main fire and do something which encouraged the rest to yell and chant. Well, out of stupidity and curiosity, we wanted to see exactly what they were doing here in the middle of nowhere. We got a bit too close and we saw a person look in our direction, stare for a few seconds, and started to walk towards where we were not 50 t away. This sent us running as fast as we could while not trying to lose each other. The person yelled, confirming it was a he, and we started to be chased by I don't know how many of these people. We could hear them charging into the forest and after us in our direction, and thank God we had that amount of a separation on them, or who knows. We got to my cousin's truck, piled in, and took off as fast as we could for the first couple 1/4 mile. Needless to say, we've never been back. I camp elsewhere. Okay, just know I absolutely love supernatural stuff, which is partly why I like night hiking, but after this experience I'll stick to just reading stuff on the internet. So the original plan was we would go out in a group of 4 people or so, but they all ended up canceling. I am a stubborn person and still am, so I stupidly decided to go alone. I know, classic horror movie shit, so I got on the road and drove to the area I was planning on hiking, but it ended up being closed, so I decided to again go to a different one I've never been on. I'm a total idiot, y'all don't need to say it. So continuing that, I started the hike listening to the one and only Panic at the Disco Dancing's Not a Crime when I heard someone. It sounded like one of the friends that was supposed to come, so I again idiotically thought they decided last minute to come. I could hear it calling my name and telling me to slow down. When it started getting closer, I turned off my music and listened closer. If it was coming towards me, it should sound clearer, which sent a chill down my spine. It honestly sounded distorted, like a record player with someone's finger on it. I started getting real uncomfortable when I noticed it was coming from the way I was heading, not the way I came from. From what I remembered, there were no other cars. I started walking back to my car, which soon turned into a run. It continued to get louder, and the moment I saw my car, I booked it. I jumped in, and again, me being the ducking idiot I am, I decided to wait for it come out into the parking lot. I waited maybe 10 to 20 seconds when I was this tall ass black figure. I'm really bad with scaling, but it was probably maybe 7 feet to 8 feet tall, which is not humanly possible, like hell nah. I duck and turn that car on and speed of. Got a speeding ticket later on, but like better than getting eaten by a ducking 7 foot tall witch ass weirdo. I honestly don't know if it was people messing with me or some sort of demon. If y'all know WTF that shit was like, comment on this, cause I'm still freaked the duck out and hate hiking alone and at night. This has a definite explanation, but still weird and scary. For a while, I was getting into nighttime photography, like taking landscape photos with the starry sky. There's a highway in Washington that leads to a really cool observatory of Mount St. Helens. So one November night, I drove out there at like 10 p.m., and walked around and took pictures till about 2 a.m. Leaving the observatory, you drive down this winding hill that eventually takes you back to the state highway. It's dark, I'm tired, and start driving down the hill. I found a corner and there's a bull elk standing in the middle of the road, staring at my car. I'm going slow enough so I stop with plenty of distance between myself and the elk. As it's staring at me, Its family crosses the road behind it. So okay, he's just protecting his family from traffic. He makes his way to the shoulder of the road and appears to start walking away. I start driving again, but this time like really slow, because seeing him startled me, and now I'm tired and alert, and out in the woods. I pass the elk and bring my speed up to about 25, both hands on the wheel, brights on, window rolled down. All of a sudden this elk is side by side with my car, keeping pace and chasing me. It freaked me out, so I sped up a little bit and it still kept up. It chased me all the way down the hill, which seemed like a mile, but maybe a little shorter, and then he finally peeled off and disappeared. My best explanation is maybe my car was threatening to its family and so he had to be a tough guy and chase me away. But the initial panic of seeing him in my headlights, and then calming down, and then being blindsided by him chasing my car was enough to give me the jitters for my entire 2-hour drive home. While I was growing up, my family would visit the same lake every year for a week every summer. As we got older, we would visit a large rock we called the cliffs, and jump off. The rock was only 15 feet tall at the highest point, but the water was really deep. When we got older, we would jump in and try to touch the bottom, but we never could. When my brother and I were in our teens, we took kayaks out to the cliffs to jump on our own. We jumped off several times, and when we got too cold we took a break on the top of the cliffs to warm up in the sun. As we were sitting there, we noticed a white shape in the water, floating towards the surface. It was a letter, H. Eventually it sank back into the water and we lost sight of it. Before we could look away or say anything, another shape was floating upwards. It was the letter E. Eventually, it too sank below, but it was soon followed by 2 more letters, L and P. We didn't jump in after that. We stood up and left without saying a word. We never mentioned it to anyone, and I forgot it even happened after a while. Several years ago I was working as a camp counselor and I told this story as a ghost story. I had forgotten about it, and I texted my brother to see if I hadn't just made it up completely. I asked him if he remembered the time we went to the jumping cliffs alone and saw something in the water. He replied yes, that he did remember. I asked him what it was and his reply was, letters. They spelled help. Anybody that has been on the Navajo reservation has either probably heard of some creepy things or have experienced pretty creepy things. Namely skinwalkers. I have only seen one. Here is my story. I come from a small town in northern Arizona that's sandwiched between the Paiute Reservation to the north and the U.S.'s largest Navajo reservation to the south. My high school being so small, a 1A high school that has, on average, 80 students enrolled every year, always had to travel south about 5 to 10 hours one way to play another high school in any sport. This means that we traveled a lot on the Navajo res. And we also usually stayed at hotels when we would head out to play and come home in the morning, but this trip was a little bit different. I remember the basketball coach saying that the school didn't have enough money to put up the teams in a hotel that trip, so we were going to be on the road for a total of about 12 hours. I was the only male senior to play basketball that season. We had just got done playing our game and headed home on our bus Big Blue. We were headed out and it wasn't long, about 2 hours of driving, before we had entered the res. By this time, everyone was asleep, with it being about 2 in the morning. When we had crossed the res's border, I noticed the bus driver had sped up and was now going about 85 miles per hour. I thought this was a little weird because he never exceeded the speed limit, at least not in my high school career. For some reason, I couldn't fall asleep like the rest of my teammates, and I just sat at the back of the bus staring out across the desolate desert landscape that was lit up by the full moon. As I looked out, I could see a figure running towards the bus at an angle of pursuit, and keeping up with the bus at 85 miles per hour. As the figure got closer, I saw that it was a humanoid form. As a matter of fact, it looked exactly like a human, only that the face was painted half black and half white with glowing eyes. Glowing eyes like a rabbit's eyes reflecting light from a spotlight. I immediately thought, holy crap. It's a skinwalker. The skinwalker ran up to the edge of the road and just kept up pace with the bus, hurtling sagebrush and rocks while staring at me. After I made eye contact with the thing, I could not look away. It was as if something was holding my head and eyes in place. The skinwalker just smiled at me, this inhuman smile that went ear to ear, showing crooked, yellow, pointed teeth. I felt like I was going to throw up and I was panicking through the whole ordeal. The skinwalker started to crumple down onto all fours, still keeping up with the bus. I could see his bones crack and reform, hair started appearing all over the skinwalker's body, and in about 3 seconds was now a coyote, and it ran off back into the desert out of view. As soon as it was gone, I ran to the onboard bathroom and puked a mixture of food and blood. I didn't want to tell anyone for fear they would think I was crazy. I confided in my Navajo friend. She told me that I needed to see the chief, who also happened to be a friend of mine, and get a blessing. I saw him the next school day in the parking lot. He just came up to me and mumbled something in Navajo while waving a feathered scepter-like thing, turned around, got in his truck and drove away. To this day, I haven't seen another skinwalker. It might be due to the fact I moved away from that town and and, if I do have to go south, I go around, way around. When I first returned from the war I was a power line rigger. This was on EHV lines, extra high voltage, the kind on the top of the steel towers. Those are transmission lines, not subtransmission like most inner-city lines. So anyway, I had a job during a heavy windstorm, 2008, to go out and repair some lines near the Colorado and New Mexico border. Great pay since it was an emergency call-out, so I agreed. I meet up with my crewmen and head down, from Colorado Springs area. We get there around 9 p.m. and start getting to work. Windstorms are notorious for felling lines, but not EHV or UHV lines, since they are rigged different. When I crane up to see the broken link on the tower and inspect the damage, I remember seeing over the tops of most trees. I observed the view for a moment and saw some light nearby, from a campfire. As soon as I saw the light I heard yelling coming from that area. It must have been about 200 to 300 yards away, but I heard a woman clearly yelling and she kept saying someone please help over and over again. I crane down and start yelling for the other guys. They heard it too and were asking questions. I told them about the campfire lights coming from the direction our trucks were facing kinda. We jumped in one of the smaller trucks, since it was 4x4, and headed down the road. We looked everywhere for the light but didn't find anything. We drove back and forth and then back again and slowed down. We rolled the windows down and stopped the truck in about the area the light would be. We all heard moaning sounds coming from the right of our truck, so to the north. It sounded like two old people who are having heart attacks. And it was really loud. So now we're on edge. The site supervisor was calling the police now and giving the general area we were at. They told us to check to see if we see anything if we felt safe. Because I had that war veteran attitude I decided to go take a look. 2 guys came with and our supervisor stayed with the truck to wait for police. Apparently they had a station not too far so they said 10 to 15 minutes. I armed myself with a pickaxe, and the other guys had conduit pipes. Like 1-inchers. We all started walking through the trees with our headlamps on, because it was really dark now. The moaning was still coming from ahead of us. We got through the trees and into a small clearing. Looked empty. The moaning stopped and we checked around. Nothing. We went back to the truck and as soon as we got to it we heard the woman yell again. Same thing. Someone please help. It was just to the north where we just were. One of the guys yelled back, "Where are you?" and got no reply. Then we heard her scream in pain and nothing else. We were already running back north and the police were showing up. They must have seen us running north because 2 of them came after us. We stopped in the field area and they stopped with us and asked us what was going on. We told them. They helped us look around and we saw nothing else. We walked back to the truck and didn't hear anything else. They said they would hang out with us for a bit. We got back to work on the line and got it fitted. The police stayed parked next to each other talking while we worked. When I craned up I couldn't see any campfire light or anything. We did the job, took about an hour and a half and we were done. When we were packing our tools to head out one of the cops left and the other came up to us. He told us that just to the west there was a small airplane that crashed and the people burned to death. He said when the police and paramedics got to the scene they were still on fire but they were gone. He told us about how 2 bodies were found away from the plane like they were crawling away from it, and 1 body was stuck in one of the windows. Said it happened in the 70s or 80s. Yeah. We packed up fast and got the duck out of there fast. So in retrospect, I never saw a fire, just light on the trees from one. I can't tell you how creepy that shit was to find out afterwards. The voices and moans were so clear. I always kind of believed in an afterlife or something, but this was truly the shit that ducked my head up. I'm so glad other people were there to experience it though. The cop believed us too, but said he didn't hear about any other reports of seeing or hearing anything in this area. This was a service road anyway, so it wasn't traveled too much. Boyfriend and I were doing a road trip around Scotland last year. We were sleeping in the car during the nights and would get up, pack up everything and head somewhere else the next day. One night we stayed in this gorgeous bay right by the sea. Beautiful sunset, lots of other campers, it was ideal. We liked it so much and wanted to hang around the area a bit longer, so the next night we stayed in the same bay. However, when we got back to the bay to set up camp for the night there was no one else there. Bit weird but whatever, no big deal. It was late when we arrived and already starting to get a bit dark and my boyfriend started cooking dinner. As he was doing so I decided to take some rubbish over to the bins about 100 feet away. Got to the bins, and suddenly heard this weird hissing sound at the top of the cliffs next to us. It just kept going on and on up there, then stopped. So I thought it might just be owls, they do weird shit like that, right? Then I heard it again. Only this time, it was coming down the cliff to my level. And it was approaching me. I shone the torch round but couldn't see anything, so I legged it back to the car and told my boyfriend. He sort of shrugged and carried on cooking, then suddenly stopped. He looked off down to where I'd heard the noise for a moment, then started packing the car. I asked him what was going on, but he just said to keep packing up quickly. We got the car all packed up, and were just preparing to leave when headlights came from down the lane. A police van drove past, towards the end of the bay, then looped back and left again. No idea what that was about. Either way, we left that bay and found somewhere more populated to stay. When I asked my boyfriend why he'd wanted to leave so quickly, he said he had heard the exact same thing I had, the hissing from up the cliffs, descending to our level and approaching, getting louder. Noped right out of that place the very next morning. Not hiking so much as car camping, but we were way the duck out there in the middle of nowhere on BLM land in Colorado. We drove for an hour and a half down a Forest Service road and didn't see another soul. You could see headlights and hear cars from miles away from our campsite. It's not like somebody could have snuck up unnoticed. We had 3 cars with us and 8 people. Just got done eating dinner, cleaned up, it was getting dark, so we went back to the cars real quick before hitting our tents for the night. Somebody had slashed the front right tire on each of the 3 cars with what appeared to be a box cutter. Everyone thought it was a prank, but it became very apparent, very quickly, that it wasn't. All of us were beyond spooked, like panicking, scary to watch spooked. We all had spares, and one dude had a gun, so we threw on our donuts while that guy literally guarded us and got the hell out of there. I still have nightmares about it sometimes. Just knowing there was some person, probably watching us, maybe wanting to harm us, makes me feel physically ill to this day. This was south of Gypsum. And it was 100% not private land. This was a marked Forest Service road in an area with dispersed camping I had visited several times before. There were 3 guys and 5 girls. The guys were all together cooking the whole time leading up to us discovering the tires being slashed. These people are my best friends, and this would be wildly uncharacteristic of any of them. For those wondering how we didn't hear it, our cars were parked 30 yards away from our fire/tents. And a car coming down a road is easy to pick out from the sounds of nature. A gentle hissing gets lost in the wind. We heard it as soon as we started walking up. The tires were slashed on the exact same spot on the sidewall. It would be almost impossible for something on the road to puncture the tires like that. Also, there was no cell service. We called the cops and ranger as soon as we got back to the highway, told them exactly what FS road we were on and gave them coordinates, but there isn't a lot for them to do. Cop told us it was good we were packing and to be careful out there. I was walking through the woods after fishing for the better part of the day. I decided to stay out real late and try and fish up some bullheads from a local watering hole. I was only about 13 and stayed out way later than I normally would. Usually I would take a trail home, but decided to cut through some thicker brush to get to my grandparents' house so I could call my mom. I knew she'd probably be freaking out a bit, even though this happened from time to time. There was an abandoned graveyard on my route. I don't remember what the story was about it, but I knew it was there. I had wandered past it before, never really checked it out. It's all overgrown and wild. I knew that if I followed on the outskirts of the graveyard I'd hit the road and be home free. The day had been pretty chilly overall for a late spring day, but I swear, in my teenage brain, that it was getting colder. I remember looking at my breath and thinking it was weird how cold it had gotten. It was overall a pretty bright night, near full moon, but in the woods it was hard to see. The graveyard was wide open, no trees. It was well lit. As I was walking up, I noticed that the ground was covered in a thin layer of fog, and remember looking into the graveyard and not really registering what I saw at first. It was a person, which at first didn't seem odd, so I kept quiet and walked into the woods a bit more so I didn't get spotted. I didn't know who it was, so I wanted to keep clear. I stepped behind some trees and lost sight of them for a moment, and when I came back around the tree, they were gone. Weird, because I was behind the tree for maybe a few seconds tops. I didn't hear anything either. I walked a bit further, keeping an eye out. I was a bit creeped out. Near the graveyard was a run-down barn? I'm not really sure, but as I got closer to it, I could see that someone was inside. I got a good look and it was a woman, probably in her 50s. The way the moonlight hit her made her look incredibly pale. She seemed to be digging, but I didn't hear anything. No sounds of a shovel or her making noise in any way. I was maybe 30 feet away. I could see she stopped and disappeared behind some debris. I decided to get the heck out of there and quickly moved to get out to the road. I tried to keep track of her, looking for where she went, but I couldn't find her. It was like she literally disappeared. I kept trucking, and came out to the road. The fog was pretty much covering the road, a small country road, fields on one side, woods on the other. As I walked down the road, she would randomly appear behind and in front of me, and I started hiding and basically playing cat and mouse. Each time I saw her, she was hard to see, only in the moonlight and stuck to the remnants of some of the old houses nearby. She always looked pale. Never made any noise. Once I got past that part of the road which had a number of barn foundations and home remnants, I never saw her again, and it instantly started getting warmer. Creeped me the heck out, and I never went that way again. I don't know who or what that was, but I told my uncle about it and he went and checked it out, thinking maybe someone was trying to excavate the graves. He said there wasn't anything messed with. They thought I was lying. Still gives me the shakes just typing this out. I know it was most likely someone wandering around looking for stuff or checking the place out, but what teenage me remembers didn't seem natural. It was also weird that she never made noise. She also seemed to be able to just appear and move around me. At one point she was right behind me, and I swear a moment later she was in front of me. About a year ago I was taking a walk at a local nature park. It's rather big, right alongside a big inlet river. I tend to cycle up there as there is plenty of drops and jumps for me to do on my mountain bike, but this one day/night was a bit weird, you know when you can just feel something in the air? I was going about my business as usual and realized it was getting pretty late, like not dark but the light was beginning to fade. Not many people were there that day, but all day I just felt like I was being watched. I lined up a drop which runs next to a set of stairs, quite a long one. Right as I hit the drop I hear this almighty ducking squawk, really throaty, bit of a roar combined with like a bird I guess. My handlebars wobbled a little bit, but I managed to get to the bottom without falling. I slam on my brakes and look up the drop behind me, and there was this figure, human-like, just standing at the top. He was wearing denim jeans with this ducking weird, almost pagan-esque robe/garment which had like feathers on it, all tattered and stuff, and he just looked at me, deadpan, no expression, and after about 10 seconds just let out this ducking noise again, really loud, eyes stretched out. I shit my ducking pants, and began to cycle out. Now it's about a 10 minutes ride of windy paths, going over little wooden bridges covering small rivers/runs, and I swear to ducking God this noise happens like 4 more times, each a little closer, and to top it off, there was ducking nobody around, like normally you get couples walking through, or older folk with their dogs, but nobody, nothing. I've been back twice since, and each time I just cannot get comfortable enough to stick around and enjoy myself like I used to. One day I think I'll grab a bunch of my pals from hockey and go exploring, see if we can figure that shit out. I was hiking up in the Cascades in Oregon. I was in a more remote area of the range. On the 6th or 7th day on the trail, the hair on the back of my neck started standing up. I chalked it up to being a mountain lion in the area. But the weird thing was the uneasy feeling never left. That night is when I heard the howling. It wasn't wolves or bears or any other animal I had ever heard. The closest thing I could relate it to is the noises apes and monkeys make. This persisted for the next few nights. Eventually things started rummaging through my campsite. Naturally I assumed it was a bear or raccoons. But then on the 11th day, I woke up and my food bag was removed from the tree. Something had cut the line through. All my food was gone. I decided to keep pushing. I had 4 days left till the end of the trail. I'm familiar with what I can and can't eat in the area, and I could always fish for food. The same nightly activities occurred, and on the 13th night something started throwing rocks at my tent. For some reason I lost it. I screamed into the darkness for whatever it was to leave me alone. Hoping it was just some person ducking with me and maybe they'd scream out, "Sorry mate," or something. Instead it grew quiet for the first time in nights. Nothing could be heard. Then a scream louder and more vicious than any other night cut through the night. Then nothing, complete and utter silence again. Despite it being quiet I wasn't able to sleep that night, I just waited. The next day I continued my hike, dead tired, just wanting to get out. The hair on the back of my neck still standing, the forest still quiet. I felt like I was being hunted. Towards the end of the day I had sat down to rest before pushing a few more miles when I saw it. Something tall and large, bigger than any man or animal I had seen, sliding through the forest not making a noise. I yelled at it. It turned to look at me. I never got a good look at it through the trees and the brush, and it was dark, but I knew that whatever it was causing this. I threw a rock at it and then pulled my knife. This thing just kept staring at me. I don't know what kicked in, but I no longer felt scared. I felt angry and I ran at the thing. It ran from me and I chased it in the woods. It had long strides and easily outpaced me, but I continued the chase. After several minutes I gave up and collapsed in exhaustion. I rested for a bit, before backtracking my way back to my backpack and resting area. I was tired and made camp there. Another night of silence when I woke up the next day and had about 10 miles till I was out. Exhausted, hungry, mentally drained, I made my way out. As I got closer and closer to the end of the trail, the typical forest noises returned. Birds, bugs, mice running through the undergrowth. All these noises slowly returned. I no longer had this feeling of unease. I got to trail's end, sat in my car, and cried. To this day I still pass it off as someone just ducking with me, but the way that thing moved in the forest, I just don't know. I told a park ranger about it and he jokingly said they have a bunch of Bigfoot sightings in the area, but most likely it was a local ducking with me or my own imagination. I do a lot of long hikes, but that 15 days was by far the worst.